Hi there. Yes.
I'm really looking forward to hearing from you on some of the points about the book also. It's such a fabulous book.
Good one, and I hope it's an interesting conversation.
Yeah. I mean, I think as a topic, it's a topic which is very close to my heart, the tyranny of metrics. And, sometimes, I feel that it's like a double-edged sword.
Can you all hear me and see the screen? Molly, Arun, since we have such an interesting conversation, we have more than 20 participants. I thought we could get started on it right away.
Sure.
Absolutely.
So good evening, everyone. My name is Srividya, and it gives me great pleasure to invite all of you for the second edition of Huddle 2021 on behalf of Feedback Insights. The topic for today is how to make metrics work for your business. Metrics is, as you all know, I mean, whether you're researchers or as a part of business, is a fundamental way of managing business. We look to numbers to tell us a little more about outcomes. We make our actions based on the stories that these numbers tell us. And today, we are going to decipher what these metrics and the usage means against the backdrop of a very interesting book written by Jerry Z. Mueller on the Tyranny of Metrics. The key point that he talks about is that metrics give significant benefits if they are used properly and accurately. And in case there's a chance that there is an incorrect usage or a misuse of a metric, then the metrics can be gamed and become corrupt and completely toxify the very reason for which it is created. Who better than the two expert speakers that we have today to throw more light on this subject? I'm really excited to welcome Arun Babji, who is a Senior Director, Engineering from Dealer Socket. A data maverick himself, he has had a ringside view on the behaviors that metrics have encouraged in corporate functions across various industries such as banking, insurance, utilities, and public sector. We also have our MD and CEO, Molly. All of you would know him and interacted with him at some point, who brings in more than 20 years of experience in the fine art of measuring customer experience, employee experience, brand, and other stakeholder experience to discuss this topic in detail. The flow for today is going to be Arun taking us through what the key contours for the discussion against the backdrop of the tyranny of metrics is going to be today. He has some interesting slides that he will share with us. Post that, we will have a fireside conversation between Molly and Arun to relate most of these topics to real life business situations to get insights on how best to use these metrics to work for us and our businesses. Few housekeeping rules for everyone. All of you, please keep yourself on mute. It is going to be an interesting conversation. In case there are any background noises, it is going to impede the flow and distract. When Arun and Molly are discussing, there may be some interesting thoughts or questions you may have, and the panelists kindly agreed to address those questions. So when the conversation is going on, request you to put the question into the chat box and they will address it. There is also a placeholder for questions post the conversation between Molly and Arun, and you could either raise your hand and ask the question directly, or you can put the question in the chat box and either of the speakers will address it. So looking forward to this discussion, and over to you, Arun.
Thank you so much. Good evening, all. without much ado, right, I feel kind of intimidated about talking about this topic, tyranny of metrics, to a company that's whose business is metrics. The trigger point was actually a tweet from Sridhar Vembu, Zoho's Sridhar Vembu, who was talking about the extreme burnout of US CEOs and how they are starting to get replaced with people from other countries, typically some of the Indian CEOs in the tech-heavy industries and non-technical sectors also. This topic is particularly interesting to most of us who are employees in one way or the other, right? Unless we are the founder, owner of the company, we all work for somebody. We know the effect that the metrics has on our jobs, on how we behave and how we cope with some of these programs, though we may have our own doubts about it. So just so that the topic is not black and white, I'm going to open up a lot of gray areas and talk on the opposite side of feedback stance. Okay, let's see where it takes us. But I thought this was extremely interesting. It's not a dry cut and dry topic. So my focus is more on the history of how these things became very important. We'll talk about some personalities, some examples. I found them quite entertaining, and it helped me appreciate how these things have gotten so far as to can we fight it or can we control it? I don't have answers, but those are left to the future. So let me just take you through a quick whirlwind tour of the history, okay, of how we got here. I thought the interest is more in the story of how things played out rather than looking at the final state of things. So that's just a picture. Okay, so this extreme obsession with metrics, I will intentionally make it extreme, okay, because otherwise there's no interest. You might have realized that, right? You might have interacted with managers, senior leaders who pride themselves on the fact that they are data-driven people, that they are data-driven leaders. The famous saying goes, right? If you talk to me if you have data, but if you have opinions, I will go with mine. So I don't know how many of you have interacted with managers, leaders of that sort. A shout out. If have you guys interacted? Have you seen a senior leader say that?
Of course, I've read another version of it.
What does that say?
In God I trust, everybody else brings data.
Correct. That's equally, right? So, I mean, it's an interesting detour of how we corrupt language and words to only mean or highlight certain meanings, aspects of it. So I'll start with accountability, right? Because all of this metrics program rides in one way or the other on this word called accountability, because leaders have to be accountable, business has to be accountable, absolutely, teams have to be accountable, and people get pumped up on that, and they get insulted if they say that, okay guys, are you accountable or not? They get insulted that their work is being questioned, their professionalism is being questioned. So this word, right, per se itself has two meanings. One is a simple English meaning, which is the most direct meaning that also we intuitively understand, which is accountable means to be responsible. How you could be responsible in a variety of ways. We'll talk about it in the course of the discussion. The other specific meaning is, I mean, this has caught the popular opinion and has entered into business world quite deeply. It means to be accountable means you are capable of being counted, capable of being measured. Yeah, right. So most people who talk about accountability actually stress on the second meaning and say that anybody is responsible only if they are capable of being counted, evaluated on some measure. Otherwise, it's all soft words. Words don't mean much. Words are cheap. So accountability in our world is taken to mean anything that is capable of being counted. So that's how the second meaning gets stressed more in today's world, right? So while it's not my argument that all of metrics is bad, okay, I only want, in today's discussion, I thought it's good to talk about this phenomenon of metric fixation, obsessive metric fixation. Have you seen people whose only discussion with you, a review with you, a planning with you is completely numbers? Because even to themselves, they think that if they don't talk in numbers, people may perceive that their words are fuzzy, cloudy. They don't have meaning. They themselves are perceived as not being masters of that, not knowing what they are talking about. It has to be hard, because that's a rational scientific thought coming from from the Renaissance period, that if you talk numbers, you are objective, and there is an objective reality outside that can only be dealt with in numbers. Rest are all soft, fuzzy, right? Two quotes I have put on top that you have heard pretty much everywhere, right? If you cannot measure it, you cannot improve it. What gets measured gets done. So Tom Peters of our times also said that, right? So I don't say that metrics is bad. I am talking about metric fixation, right? Anything done excessively has side effects. So what exactly is this fixation about? I mean, where would you call that somebody is fixated with metrics, right? You can easily identify such people. Okay, they take themselves, they are very hard on themselves as well as on others, and they have these three beliefs. One is that they really think, okay, it's their worldview, that it's possible, desirable. You don't need to have judgment. Okay, you can replace judgment. You can replace all of your personal experience, the insights that you have, the craft that you bring in, by looking at numerical indicators, okay, and by comparing with standards or other teams. So when you have benchmarks, etc., it is possible and desirable to manage an organization in that way. I don't say business, because we are not only talking of we are also talking about not for profit. A lot of other organizations that don't really follow the standard corporate motto. So that's one belief. Okay, tell me if I'm talking about real people you have seen. Okay,
Absolutely.
So all of us talk metrics. I'm not saying that. I mean, you must now get all fuzzy and what do you say? Talk about feelings or that stuff. I'm talking about obsession with metrics. Number one is this. This is a belief that people have. Okay, if you probe them a little, this will easily be known. And the second point is they also believe that, okay, how do you hold people, teams, departments accountable? You got to make them, okay, the easy trick is to just publish it, make those metrics public, to ensure that everybody is accountable, because with visibility comes public shame or censure or praise. So departments, people react to it, and this is one belief, overriding belief. The third one is also that they have a belief, most of the metric fixated people have a belief that you can motivate people with a carrot and stick policy. And you have seen a lot of programs designed around it. Let's discuss where we got here. But I want to be clear that I'm not deriding all of metrics. I'm saying that metric obsession, fixation with metrics, excessive fixation over measure and manage philosophy guys, hard nut guys, have these traits. That's what the book says. Okay, none of this is original. Okay, so I'm just summarizing the book. Again, a question. Okay, you might have done so many surveys, interacted with organizations, leaders. Have you seen people who discount a lot of context, the nuance that is to be used in interpreting a metric while exhibiting these kind of behaviors?
Absolutely. I mean, on a lighter note, I just realized how schools used to get better pass percentage by putting out the results on the notice board, and also to announce subject marks openly in the class. That's, I think, to me, I think that comes in as an immediate response. But having said that, of course, a lot of gray here, because I may not completely agree with what you're saying, and it's not you saying, but it's the book which says this. But let's talk about that, where it came in from.
Correct. Now to the interesting part, okay, see, because unless there is a story which captures us, this is all, that's the dry part of it. So, but was it always done this way? I mean, how did these numbers, hard numbers, objectivity, a scientific approach to manage things, how did it acquire such a big influence that today businesses, not for profit organizations, government, healthcare, public sector, schools, military, everything is getting managed in this way? So I thought this detour would be very interesting to people. This happened somewhere in the 1860s. So you recognize 1857 is our first war of Indian independence, right? So we all take great pride in it. That was when this English parliamentarian Robert Lowe introduced a legislation about corporate setup, the Joint Stock Company Act. So he is famous for that. This guy, Robert Lau, he tasted success with that. And in 1865, he was the first guy to actually talk about something called as a pay for performance legislation in England, about a better way to fund public schools. Because he said the government is not getting its money's worth. How do we hold these schools? How do we actually ensure that the money is well spent? So that is where education from that day on took a different direction about people measuring something like these 3 R's, right? Read, write, and maths, arithmetic. Demonstration of those skills were actually emphasized in lieu of so many other soft factors, and we'll talk about that with examples as we move forward. But that's where it started to come into prominence, and a lot of countries have adopted it, are still adopting it. No Child Left Behind of Obama, even our Indian education system also adopts it, of measuring a school's performance, of how many people pass out, how many measuring the literacy of how many kids are able to read, write, and do basic maths, right, at different levels. That's also the focus of NEP in a way, right? But you and I know that we all intuitively appreciate that schools actually do a variety of things. Those are only these 3 R's are specific aspects of it. So that started, okay, very influential guy bringing it in glory days of England, where the sun never sets on the British Empire, must have had a big influence on everybody. The second wave came with Frederick Taylor, who implemented this scientific method. It's called scientific management, okay, of studying how people work on an assembly line, of what are the steps they do. He was working in a pig iron factory, and he was trying to understand how do you get more productivity with uneducated labor, because those were people who were brought in from villages, who were working for the first time in a factory setup. How do you get more productivity? So he was the first one to study motion, time taken to do a specific job, breaking down a complex assembly process, manufacturing process into distinct steps, giving a standard time for it, and attaching a carrot and stick mechanism, right? They get a bonus if they produce a certain number. They get penalized if they don't produce a certain number. So this Taylorism took off from that pig iron factory to assembly lines of all automobile companies and became a norm. So it became, this culture of Taylorism actually spread so far and wide that at least in the 1950s, the glory days of Detroit. Now you can't venture into downtown Detroit. It's downright dangerous. It's a sunken town, okay, with a glorious past. The labor got so devalued that everything that was of value, right, including the planning of who should produce what, how much, in what sequence should people work, when should they take a break, and measuring, managing became a norm, that the whole skills around labor got devalued, and workers sunk to the bottom of the hierarchy because they became completely unskilled. Their supervisor would tell them what to do, and they had to do it, and everything was planned. How much was produced, how are things to flow, etc. So these are the norms we easily recognize from manufacturing sectors, right? That came from Frederick Taylor. Now comes the most important part, okay? Even more than this, something very interesting happened from World War II, a very influential personality. How many of you guys have heard of this guy, Robert McNamara?
Yeah.
Right? Anybody else? Have you read about his memoirs and the impact he has had on military strategy, negative as well as positive, and general business culture?
Yeah.
Okay, so that story is interesting. Okay, this guy, brilliant guy. I'm talking about the advent of World War II. He was already he was a BA in economics from University of California, Berkeley. Then he got a master's from Harvard Business School. At the time of World War II, the US Defense Department invited him to collaborate with the US Air Force to improve the way they fought wars. It was primarily about improving logistics. Because you know that even today, the US Armed Forces run one of the most complicated logistical operations in the whole planet. They project their power anywhere, right? So he came up with several quantitative methods, which are typically what you study in B schools, like optimization, right? Optimization, working around constraints. How do you maximize a particular parameter, etc. So he was numerically obsessed. So he brought that technique to the US Air Force in World War II. So that caught the attention of a lot of people. People pulled him. So this was about being more quantitative and how to increase productivity, how to get things in places where they are needed exactly. So this caught the eye of people in Ford, and they pulled him and his team. They were called the Whiskits in Ford. So he became the president of Ford around 1960s. Before, he was then pulled on to be the Secretary for Defense in the US presidency, US government. That was when Vietnam War happened. And that was the time when this approach, quantitative managing through quantitative methods, took center stage. Okay, so even the US military, which was run by military generals, okay, started to apply these kind of quantitative techniques even to war strategies. As much as you have followed Vietnam War, you know that things didn't pan so well for the US military. But he was the one who bought who bought a lot of very good quantitative methods to manage military spending programs. Okay, nobody argues with that. Those are the things that you see in accounting today, management accounting, about how do you do product-wise costing, how do you do activity-based costing, how do you assess the best strategy, which program should be funded. He was the one who also bought the game theory of John Nash, who brought it into play in the strategy department of US Armed Forces. So even 4-star, 5-star generals were actually pissed off listening to people who had no grounding, these quants or Whiskits as they call themselves, who had no grounding in military. They were being told about how to run military campaigns. So the obsession with numbers started there. The metrics that some of them that were proposed was stuff like how many bombing sorties do you do in a day? How many shells did you fire? So the focus was on measurable production, and even in terms of where to fight, which places to fight, how many flights to go, how many bombing raids to do in a day. They were being told by these quantitative guys. Of course, the reaction was pretty bad. US lost. The measure was also that people in the field were rated on the body count. Okay, how many how many enemies they killed, and how many of their own guys they saved. Okay, didn't get killed. The casualty rate. So it went so far that people actually faked a lot of statistics in the war also. So they went to the field. There were people who got killed because they had to get a body count to report to their leaders. This was the strategy, and sadly, not much has changed even in the Iraq war and the Afghanistan war also, because even military tactics about how to fight insurgency were being dictated by these guys who had never fought a war. They had never been in the field. They had no instinct. They had no empathy to think of how would an enemy think during those times. So to give you an example, okay, in an insurgency operation, every insurgency operation is very impossible to predict. The terrain is different. The enemy's tactics could be different. It could be guerrilla tactics. It could be ambush. It could be straightforward fight, totally firing at you with our guns blazing. And tactics on the ground are important. The victory or defeat is actually determined by how much of a ground do you control vis-a-vis how much of the territory does your enemy control, right? So even in Afghanistan, as recent as Afghanistan, the same tactics, the same metrics were employed to judge military, that most of them, the military generals, also started to behave like MBA graduates. Nothing against MBA. Okay, of course, many of us have been through the same stream, but they themselves started to think like general business leaders and say and produce these set of extensive metrics. It took a lot of energy from the organization, and on the ground, nothing changed. Because as soon as they did a particular bombing sortie and went back, okay, the enemy came back, their adversary came back and reclaimed the territory. But on paper, it was impressive. How many schools how many buildings did they build? How many raids did they go? How many shells did they fire? How many missiles were fired? What was the body count, vis-a-vis casualty? Everything looked fantastic. But on the ground, they did not control the territories. So that is an example of, that could be, those are examples of metrics that just didn't work and actually lost them the war. Okay, the thinking again comes from metric obsession, right? It says a general management. Okay, the difference between managing any kind of industry, okay, be it a business, be it military, be it school, college, healthcare, the difference is not important as the similarity between them. As long as you get a metric, you understand the dashboard, you can run any kind of complex enterprise, because the feeling of looking at numbers gives you that confidence. Okay, I've seen numbers are objective, there's nothing to bluff about here, and I'll go by this. Whereas it causes a very toxic effect on the organization's ability to succeed, morale and ability to succeed. I'll talk about the problems very shortly. Yeah, these are the problems I'm talking about. Okay, what happens when these sort of leaders take over who are obsessed about metrics? Two sort of problems. One is distortion of information, right? Because you run a huge machinery to get more, to just collect metrics itself. So then you measure what is most easily measurable, whether it matters or not. How many raids did I go? How many classes did I take today? What is the you can name several easy to measure metrics. They're easy to measure. Again, the second bullet is not really a separate one. It's coming out from the first one itself, because you don't measure the desired outcome when it's too complex. You don't understand what is to be achieved. You just measure what is simple to measure, because you can, right? So if you can't measure outcomes, you then start to measure inputs. The number of bombing rates was an example. The number of operations performed, the time spent in this procedure.
Right.
Those are all the sort of things that measure inputs rather than outcomes. When you also believe that you can standardize information, that these metrics can be summarized for multiple departments, but they convey the same meaning, you actually take the context out of it, and you start to believe that, okay, as long as I'm seeing numbers, for example, a productivity figure of so much in this department can be compared with a productivity figure of so much in another department, because these have been standardized. You don't really understand the context also. Right. So this is actually degraded information quality. But since you are seeing numbers, you are even high in confidence, because numbers don't lie. You can bulldoze your way through anybody and intimidate people to do what you want with these kind of a value, right? Behaviors. The second problem is actually gaming the metrics, right? Mouli mentioned some. One is gaming through creaming, because as a doctor, for example, if I am being compensated, or if my rating credibility depends on how many of my patients don't die, I will not accept very difficult, risky patients. Why should I risk my metric? If police are being rated by how many cases they solve, they will not register certain cases. Yep. Because they know it's difficult. Why would they, right?
I'm so tempted to bring in key account management as a concept. Why it fails in most places, sir. So please carry on.
I mean, if you want to, Mouli, jump in. No? You can
talk absolutely, about absolutely. Please continue. We'll talk. Yes.
Yeah. The second one, gaming through creaming, right? No professional is going to take a risk that is going to make him look bad by those metrics. But it doesn't matter if it's his professional ethos or not. But why would he take that risk? Number two is you lower standards. You've already seen this. Prime example is education, because if a school is being funded by how many kids pass out, can read, write, they will lower the standards. Obviously, everyone is going to pass. You can, and you see that in numerous other examples. I mean, I don't have to belabor this point. Third one, improving numbers through omission or distortion of data. Say, for example, in the police, if there is a case, okay, and the police, each circle is being rated by how many cases they solve. They will not even take a case. They will say, this case doesn't belong to my station limits. This is go to the other station to file a complaint. We all get very agitated about this and say, how can the police behave? Aren't they supposed to be our servants and other stuff? But that outrage doesn't serve a purpose, because those guys also have a career. They are being rated on how many cases they solve. And if they are understaffed, they don't have the resources, they would rather not take it. They would omit that. And if they have a target, like artificial target, like to reduce the incidence of crime by so much, they will reduce a burglary as a trespass. Why report it as burglary? Because then there is more effort to solve it. just put it as trespass of property so that the legal procedures that the police, the work they have to do is minimal. Distort the data. Last one is outright cheating, right? So when schools are funded based on the number of kids that pass, you have seen instances where even teachers, principals, they write the exam on behalf of the kids. You cheat on the scores. So these are the problems with metric fixation that creates a very toxic atmosphere for everybody involved, okay, including employees, professionals whose basic professional ethics are challenged because it goes against their ethics. So we talk about, okay, in the ensuing discussion, we'll talk about where it works and doesn't work. I just thought it's very interesting to discuss about a few examples that have actually worked out and understand why it worked. It's not, so metrics is good when used in the right manner. So where it works is, see, when the intrinsic motivation of people, say for example, a doctor's intrinsic motivation is to save lives. If you have a metric program aligned around that and give him any kind of metric, he's obviously going to be motivated. You don't need a second way to motivate. So their intrinsic motivation, their professional goals have to be aligned to the metrics program. You should not go against the code of conduct or ethics of that particular practice. So some examples, these are all from the US because the book talked about that, but I'm looking forward to Mouli to bring some good examples from India too. So one is Cleveland Clinic. You might have heard of their excellent practice. Every year they bring about 14 outcome books on treatment of various ailments. Okay? These are very high quality publications, but this metric, they have a target to actually publish this every year, but it doesn't create any kind of dissonance, dissatisfaction in the organization, because even before this, their organization culture was one of having a very highly skilled, trained, service-oriented doctors and healthcare professionals. They were already on top of the trade. So just publishing it actually motivated these people even more to do a better job than demotivate them in any manner. The second one, another impressive example from the state of Pennsylvania, where this Geisinger health system, right, they themselves pioneered, involved doctors, nurse, case managers, assistants, I name everybody, pharmacists, dietitians, etc., because they served a very poor area. Okay, since all healthcare professionals pride themselves on improving the healthcare outcomes, they themselves came up with the idea of actually sharing an electronic case file of a patient electronically between all of these people to say that, okay, typically treatment is always good, but after treatment, patients go home and the poor people really don't follow up. There's nobody to advise them to take tablets regularly, manage their food or their lifestyle. So they shared it between them. They assigned a case manager for all of these poor patients. They visited them, made sure that they took medication properly, and then the outcome was a successful outcome. Third one, again, this was critically acclaimed. I'm sure I've heard of cases in India too of this sort. This is a good case study also published in Harvard about this Michigan Keystone Project. Okay, this was about simple thing. The biggest case of patient deaths was found to be infections that were introduced through the central line. This is the catheter, right, that they put in your hand or your arms or something and keep it. They keep this all the time till the patient is admitted for administering liquid food and liquid medicines. So this was the leading cause of infections, and there was a lot death rate and huge complications because patients got infected. So even during COVID, you had this black fungus phenomenon that is due to infection in the oxygen pipelines, which have not been used for quite a long time. Fungus in that. Right? So they actually worked with everybody involved, put up a simple checklist and monitoring program to all the hospitals, the doctors, nurses, healthcare, the staff. Everybody was trained on 5 points that they should follow to reduce infections, and they had very impressive results. So in all these cases, right, you could definitely talk about a lot more. There is no dissonance between the people themselves are quite motivated to do this, right? And I will stop with the last point. So that was the focus of our discussion of where it does not work. So we've already seen when you do pay for performance. I want to tell you, you will already know that in 2008 financial crisis or the frauds before that, the only reason was that leaders were actually had huge bonuses to on their stock price or the obscene profits they bought, they had an incentive to reduce all of risk to a single metric called value at risk. You might have read that case study. So if you understand all of risk, they said 99% of the time, my assets are going to give a positive return. But they were all compensated on that. But nobody told them that in the 1% that a risk materializes, they would be finished. And that is what exactly happened. There are numerous cases other than that. We could go into it later. Yes. But pay for performance doesn't work. It doesn't work. When you work as a team and you have clear goals that align with your professional ethos, you really don't need a very complex pay for performance. It encourages unethical behavior. Yeah. And the second one is also when you bring in a new leader, they are, I mean, it's into a very complex organization with multiple goals. A corporate is much easy, but look at it like somebody managing a public service department, a hospital, school, university. They have much more complex goals, right? Military, police. So they take upon themselves to say, how can I understand fast and leave a legacy? My first 100 days, what am I going to change? So they increasingly rely on a metrics program to say, okay, show me the numbers. And they don't absorb the nuance of it. They don't appreciate the culture of the organization. And sometimes they use that metrics program also to control some of those old timers who are still in the organization that they distrust. They want to disempower them and say, hey guys, they use metrics as an excuse to control them. The third one is, right, so all said and done, there are certain enterprises which are quite complex in their goals. You can't even say what do they exist. They exist for multiple reasons, like schools. Publicly funded schools exist for multiple reasons. It doesn't exist to get everybody 99% marks and a pass in IIT JEE. So then a lot of effort goes. The problem is not easily solvable with metrics. Even though people know it, they spend a lot of money virtue signaling by showing that we have put in so much effort in gathering metrics, publishing the data, and making a show and dance about it, absolutely, just to keep themselves employed.
So in fact, the classic example is the whole NGO sector, which has to put out, but so I think I know it's a very, very good review of this. We could just even stop sharing, so we could just talk around with each of us looking at it. So Shiv, you could just
I hope it was not a boring summary, right? The examples will also come. There are quite a lot of examples that makes it lively, but I thought by in itself it is interesting because some of us, at least I have come across a lot of leaders who have behaved in such manner.
Absolutely. So I don't know, this is interesting. So let me just now, I think the topic is how do you get your metrics to work for your organization? I think what we now spoke about is what can go wrong and where we could kind of lose out on using metrics. So, of course, there are enough examples in an Indian context in each of our work lives, and, how we had metrics during the COVID. And I mean, we could just talk, and I'm sure a lot of us have this thing about, appraisal is the whole classic metrics program, which typically goes wrong in most organizations. So one of the things that I want to just share with you is that metrics for when. So, one of the things that I have seen in my experience, and I want to get your views on it, the Six Sigma as a program and lean practices work so damn brilliantly when you're in a manufacturing context where the unknowns and the uncontrollables are very few and everything else is controllable in a manufacturing context. And to have a Six Sigma which works brilliantly, but to take the same Six Sigma and lean and put it on a sales process, or let's say a relationship management process, lands up not giving you the same kind of outcome. I mean, the latest to add to that is account-based marketing, where there's a metric. So we've reduced that account-based marketing and relationship building also to a metric saying, how many times have met and so on. So you could meet, but the end outcome. So how do you see, you come from a software development background and, a product development background, and there are a lot of things which are measurable and controllable in those situations where you see, I'm sure you've got exposed to a lot of metrics on Six Sigma and successful Six Sigmas and where it doesn't work. Any thoughts on that, Arun?
Yes. So outside of manufacturing, I don't believe any other industry has had success with Six Sigma and all of this lean agile is an attitude. Okay, but let me restrict myself to Six Sigma. Outside of manufacturing, I don't think too many people have had success with it. Because the key with metrics is, right, numbers. Again, I go back to numbers. It all comes from the time that Newton started that revolution. But everything is scientific physics, chemistry, it is deterministic. You can put numbers to stuff. So in these numbers work if you are very close to physical phenomenon. That, right, outside of that, when people, behaviors, complex motives are
Correct.
involved, environment changes, it is not possible to, you can measure it retrospectively, but you cannot control, because what would you control? Your employees change, team changes, budgets change, focus changes, missionary things change, how you produce, what you produce changes. No one work piece is similar to the next work piece.
So
One
correct,
patient,
sir.
right? So they have not found much success, even though people may advocate it quite a number of times. My personal experience, I have not seen much success
That's
for it.
true.
Sometimes I think this
if you look
approach
at
is wrong.
today's context of, deliveries happening in 10 minutes, your groceries can come in 10 minutes, and which was half an hour. So we're really creating an artificial metrics driven thing to kind of move. And, there's enough stories about the lives and the treatment for some of the delivery boys and the hyper local delivery models that are emerging. But another thought in this whole metrics, and of course, how to make the metrics work. One of the things that I've seen in working, and I've been actually talking to a lot of clients, and one of the things that I've found where metrics work is when the metrics is sufficiently nebulous, while there is a measure, but you use the measure with certain amount of giving a allowance of working around it actually works. What I mean by this is essentially about metrics which are about at least open 1 or 2 new clients in this region, ability to sell at least 2 additional services in this marketplace kind of thing seem to be working more than saying a revenue share of a pie between these 5 services need to be exactly this 25%, 28%, 10%, 7% kind of a thing, versus opening new doors and stuff like that seem to be working. Anything that you've seen in yours and your clients' context which works in similar?
No, exactly same. Today, you see a lot of these sort of goal-oriented metrics. You can't really specify that by the end of the year, my business is going to be 20% of the whole company's revenue streams. It depends on the markets, subsegments, right? So it is actually better to appreciate that nuance and have a goal of how much are you achieving in each of those subsegments given the circumstance. But it's actually too much. It's taking us down the rabbit hole. Not many people want to deal with it. They are comfortable if you publish a metric and they hold you accountable. Rest of the stuff is actually left to the people on the ground who may grumble and do it, but they have to conform to these standards. That's where we are today.
Yeah,
I don't think it will change.
So we're all experiencing when we leave our car or the bike for service, and after taking the service, you'll have a call center person calls up and said, on an 8, 9, 10 scale, can you please rate? And this is a story which is close to our heart in terms of doing satisfaction surveys. So actually the scale is a 0 to 10 scale, but the person says 8, 9, and 10, because if you get below 8, you don't get your variable. You don't get the incentive for that whole service call that's been done. I have another interesting point about when things succeed. When does metrics succeed? It's also about kind of refreshing the metrics and keeping the metrics more agile as the world changes, as the environment changes, as the ecosystem changes. And I think instead of talking theory, I would like to talk about some examples specifically on the service front. Okay. I think there was a period about telling, SLA, we'll call, we'll pick up the ring in 2, we'll pick up your call in 2 rings. Somebody will call you back in 2 minutes and we will solve your problem in 2 hours. And apparently it didn't work in most cases. But if you're able to kind of now bring in technology and enable that by bringing and re-looking at the metrics on a continuous basis and what's practical, it works. And I know of certain categories that it works. If a classic example is Dell. I think one of the best service experience that people have is about the Dell providing service and bringing in innovation in the service models really have worked when you kind of keep the metrics. So one of the fears I have is that while we talk about the tyranny of metrics, it's very important when firms and organizations are scaling that you need to have metrics. In the absence of metrics, so this is not an advocate to say, let's all junk our metrics models and metric programs.
Right.
But it is important to also keep an eye on the metrics and what we're looking at. And one of the biggest failure of today's corporate India is also this quarter to, QSQT, quarter se quarter tak. So nobody's looking at building the organization in the long run, because you're just looking at this quarter growth and my margins. So you're not building an organization, while, it's a classic thing that, that happens, that, you're missing the woods for the trees. So I think it's important that you also measure the trees and not just the wood.
Correct. That measurement was okay, right? You might have noticed those things about the people answering a call within 3 rings, or being very prompt in saying, I'm going to put you on to somebody, or okay, I have given you a complaint number, acting like robots.
Right.
Nobody was happy with that kind of a service, though the service quality measures, the SLOs were met.
Correct.
But this works beautifully when the interaction is with is technology led, because people don't mind chatting with a bot that says, okay, how can
Absolutely.
I help you? Pick 5 points, you pick one, and it's automatically guided. You don't get frustrated, because that's what you expect. That's what scales. You can measure it also about how much of interactions did you fulfill via your technology enabled channels, rather than high cost human. Right? As long as it works, it's transactional, it's inquiry based. They want information and it's satisfied, it works. But
Yes.
It doesn't help to have that same metrics on people, to put such kind of a mechanical robotic metrics on them, because the reason somebody is talking to people in customer service is for a different thing.
Absolutely. So essentially, one of the things I also read and seem to be converging with the point you're making is bringing in technology where hard metrics matter, so that you can repeat it without failure over and over again. And I think that's a place where the beauty of technology, the power of technology is allowing today, with all the digital transformation which is driving. But for others, I think having a nebulous metrics, you need to measure it. But I think the measurement has to be connected to the individual and the context. And like you said, you can't compare apples and oranges, and it's important to treat apples and oranges separately. I think it's a good conversation, Arun. I think, we're 10 minutes in to close this. We can take up questions, any questions that are coming in from the listeners. And I just open up for any questions coming in, any thoughts, any counterpoints. Of course, we've given a very heavy dosage of one side of the story on. It was in a way also a review of the book, The Tyranny of Metrics. So it is important to also hear that point of view. We can take up questions. Srividya?
Yeah, so I have a question for both of you. There's an important point that you made, Molly, about groceries coming in 15 minutes, Swiggy delivering in half an hour to 45 minutes, and the time taken being a very important factor for decision making on whether you're going to take a particular supplier or not. So given that metrics influences a lot of behaviors and customers, what is it that an enterprise for using these should keep in mind so that it doesn't get abused?
Absolutely. At least I'm going to talk from some of the conversations I've had with leaders. One of the biggest problem is, today with technology, you can kind of push that envelope. You can even move to the extent that you have a drone to deliver it even in 5 minutes. Maybe you can have a runner boy who will just keep cutting. So you don't know, the possibilities are immense. But the question is, it has to be connected to whether there's a need. So the whole joke and the whole Twitter and the social media is, you need the grocery in 10 minutes. I mean, who needs the grocery in 10 minutes? And is that a model? And the classic other example is also about pizzas being delivered in 39 minutes. If it's not delivered, it's free. Now, who wanted it in the 39 minute? I mean, this is more a marketing ploy, but the real need isn't about the to be delivered in that shorter time. So firms need to be careful about when you choose to define the metrics, define it with not the best case scenario, but a worst case scenario, to ensure that you cross that threshold, and over a period of time look at continuous improvement. In fact, if you go back to the manufacturing philosophy, continuous improvement is the one that really led to some of these beautiful metrics coming in, but I think we've stretched it too far.
Just adding one interpretation to it, right? This 15-minute delivery of grocery may or may not work, but the only difference between this and Domino's Pizza was that Domino's Pizza's locations were actually not determined based on this criteria. This was an add-on thought. But today, these businesses are actually setting up warehouses in small lanes in abandoned buildings or dark, houses, small places with no ventilation. They just have a warehouse and they're able to deliver. So their business model itself is based on locating in these places.
Right.
It may or may not work, but they have thought this through. But where it's a bad metric is you put a Domino's pizza somewhere and you endanger the life of a person in trying to get it delivered in 25 minutes. It doesn't make you look good. And getting a pizza in 25 minutes at that cost is not worth it. It's not even good publicity for your organization. No wonder a lot of people dropped it. Right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We have a few more minutes to go before we wind up. We can take up more questions if there are.
I have one more question to both of you. Is there a business scenario that you've seen in real life which kind of exemplifies how metrics are misused? And you have a business scenario where you can say the best use of metrics?
So, I know of a diesel generator set company where, they used to measure a metric called mean time to repair, MTTR. And they had a MTTR of solving 99% of all the problems under 4 hours. And, and that is fabulous. We just imagine it's got more than 200,000 installations across the country. And they had such a network that they could solve all problems in 4 hours. Mean time to repair was 4 hours. And, but when you really get into the details, what you once saw was the system was, and I think that's where Arun's example really came in, folks used to use the application on the mobile and accept the application when they're standing outside the client's gate. Then you go inside, finish the problem, come outside, and then log out by saying I've completed the problem. So what happened was we're measuring completely a wrong measure. So, commonsensically, it was next to impossible because travel time with traffic in an Indian city would be easily an hour and a half to reach a place. But so essentially, it's a wrong metric that we're really kind of measuring in this example. So one doesn't know what good it kind of serves. But so the next question is, I think it's $1 million question. So what should be measured? Should you have a metric? So should you run a business with no metric? Not really. I'm not saying one is not advocating we should not have a metric, but capture what the number is. Draw the a graph, do the normal distribution, look at where the mean score looks like, where is that whole thing peaking in, do you see a variance in data, and then put a metrics model together is a lot more sustainable model. And I think intuitively, plus also it's worked in some companies that have done it so intuitively and also organically.
Yeah, Mouli, this is Prakash.
Hi.
Hello. Yeah. Thanks to both of you for a wonderful topic that you've chosen for conversation. I'm sorry I'm not able to turn my video on for some reason. My laptop is refusing to cooperate with me. Very interesting topic, very close to my heart, because as a CEO, I sometimes, I think the message that I've got from many people who examine my business is that we over measure everything, over dissect and track too many things. And, it turned out that about 2 years back, we were tracking something like 180 or 190 metrics in the organization, right? So at various levels, not just me, but getting reported at all levels. And so the big challenge was that, there was no efficiency in reviewing and then knowing what was the right metric to go after and all that. So what we did last year, and it's paying off results for us now, is that we classified all our metrics into 3 groups. And I want to ask your opinion if that can be improved, because this is something that we thought of, because there were too many things that we were tracking and we were struggling with, dealing with all of those. So what we did was we said we classified into 3 groups, and we said the first one we called it as strategic metrics.
Right.
We said these are those that are crucial for our business, and then we said it should not be more than 10 or 11 for the entire organization. Right. Things like your delivery performance and whatever is important to the customer, whatever issues are there in terms of productivity measures in the plant. We holistically looked at it, and from our strategy we drove down and we said these 11 metrics we need to focus on. Then there was about 30 or 40 metrics that we said that we will monitor it and then let the team improve it. We won't give any thrust to it. There are other smaller groups within the team that will improve on it. So let's let them work on it. Let the senior team not focus on it. Let the middle management and the lower middle management try to improve the remaining 40, 50 metrics. And then we had another whole bunch of, I think, 80 or 90 metrics. We said, we'll just measure it, but we won't do anything about it unless they go out of track,
Right.
and then only manage it by exception. So this inspiration actually came from a very old book of mine. I don't know how many of you have read this book, but it's a fantastic book. I think I reread that book. I must have read it 4 or 5 times, and I read it every year just before I start my business planning process. It's called Managerial Breakthrough. It's written by an author called Dr. Duran. It's a 1954 publication. And then he talks about, gives the human body as an example. And he says there are so many things in your human body that needs to be under control. You're not measuring all of those things. You only need to do a few metrics that are crucial for your health, and you only track those things. So when you guys were talking about the gaming of numbers and, all the things that you talked examples, I can recollect so many instances in my own organization where we had to work around this and build systems around it to ensure that the right numbers get reported. So
Certainly.
I wish, I joined in 15 minutes late, so I couldn't hear the entire conversation, but I really thoroughly enjoyed the conversation between the two of you and the insights that I got from Arun and yourself. So is there anything else that you think we should do?
Yes.
I would be delighted to hear.
Yes. So one thing that I've seen, Prakash, the latest is seemingly how do you leverage the whole digital transformation to kind of keep measuring, like the last 80, 90 that you said, you don't need an intervention of a human intervention. You can keep measuring over a period of time and use natural progression to kind of play that out and keep changing the thresholds. So it's like literally like the way you have a Bernoulli's equation. It's literally the flow tap kind of a thing. Literally use the metrics and change the thresholds based on what's coming through. And some of those we don't want to leave an impression that metrics are not important. Metrics, so you need to measure. The only question is whether you need to have an obsession of those measures. And sometimes when you have the number, you all tend to, look at it very closely. So, the closest example for me is the Fitbit. Till the time I didn't have the Fitbit, I was never obsessed with how many steps I walk. But now I seem to be obsessed with how many steps I walk every day. Completely irrelevant, but somehow I keep every day looking at how many steps I walk. So brilliant strategic approach, Prakash, about keeping those 11 metrics, which are strategic ones, because then those become super crucial. And again, chances are very low for them to be gamified,
Only there's a question for you in the chat box. Can you elaborate on what metrics work and what do not work in PBM from JK?
Can you read it again? I'm not able to see the chat window.
Question to you. Can you elaborate what metrics work and what do not work in EBM?
In India, is it?
Is it in India?
Yeah, I presume you're saying in India, but okay. Yeah. But so what metrics? So some of the metrics which are repeatable, less dependent on vagaries, dependent on vagaries of things which are in the non-controllables, those kind of metrics become difficult to manage and track. Things which are pretty much in control with few degrees of freedom actually are things that can be definitely measured. So, that's one of the reasons we were talking about in a manufacturing, in a production context, the metrics work brilliantly. It works very, very brilliantly if you talk about healthcare. The entire healthcare runs on the metrics. For our health check that you do and stuff like that, it works because they don't have vagaries of how they can happen. What doesn't work is essentially, for example, sales effectiveness and having metrics around it. Having metrics around relationship and saying how many times you have to go and meet. I can meet 20 times the client, but I may not make any impression just because I have a metric of how many times I'm meeting. That's because it depends on the quality. Another person just meeting once can just win over the deal. So those kind of metrics which are not really advised to really meet. And I think the question is also about account-based marketing.
Yes.
So there's also this balance. In fact, all the metrics-led programs have failed. Balance scorecard failed. in account-based marketing, the jury is yet to be out, but there are 3 measures which I think a very renowned organization has put out. 3 R's, which is reputation, relationship, and revenue, as 3 metrics to measure account-based marketing program effectiveness. You need measures again, but let's not hard code it. So it works till the time you don't hard code it and just literally tie it to, because one of the biggest problem of metrics in these situations are, it gives an impression that above the threshold, above 40, it's brilliant. At 39, it is not. It really doesn't work that way, because there's a shades of grades. It progresses towards that, and it's not like a cutoff, but it happens in certain kind of metrics. It does happen. There are thresholds that really work. And I don't know how much I answered your question, JK. But it's a fabulous question. I think there's a brilliant book on balance scorecard. I can't recall the name of this author. It's a brilliant book by on balance scorecard.
Robert Kaplan, is it? The guys
Kaplan,
who came up with
Robert Kaplan's book. Yeah. And in any other questions, I overshot on time. We have 6:03. Are there any other questions? I think this is a topic that can keep going on. It's a debate, and we've not even scratched the surface. There's so much more to talk. There's so many more Indian examples to talk about. But I think this book is a beautiful book, and I think it's a wonderful book to give another perspective. Of course, it's taken away by the name. It says The Tyranny of Metrics. So, yep.
If you're close, I want to. I just want to make 2 points. Okay.
Absolutely.
Particularly interesting.
Please.
Ailing most organizations. One is ailing most organization. Okay. You have seen people who think their job responsibility, or they rate themselves on how well they conform to these metrics. They have absolutely no idea or interest in the ultimate outcome. They say, this was my job, my compartmentalized look at the job. I did it. That's it. Now you have to ask the others how they took it forward. So there is absolutely, with this metrics program, it is going against the concept of accountability, because originally it means responsibility. So have you talked to the guys you work with? Forget this metrics here, but did it have the effect?
Absolutely.
Was the other guy able to pick it up and get the job done? It has actually discouraged all such collaboration. So those sort of organizations, even with strong metric programs, right, don't really hit the goals. And you see so many examples. One beautiful metric, somebody described this again from the Afghanistan war, that is not coming from any academic literature, was how people then started asking about the prices of non-local commodities in Afghanistan provinces. Okay, they took it as a metric of how successful how peaceful is a region. Okay, how much was US military able to control? At first, you don't see a relation, and I was zapped when I saw that logic. It said, okay, look, a region is peaceful only when trade happens, whether Taliban controls it or US Army controls it. You will know the prices of these commodities only when when you can talk to the market guys and get those numbers. You got to go there. You got to have you have to have feet in the ground. Number 3, non-local things. It's actually measuring the price of non-local things, which means that a vegetable grown in one region going to another province can happen only when there is peace. So is that happening at all was actually a metric that was suggested as a means to monitor the military effectiveness of intervention in Afghanistan. Who would have thought of it if you are not on the ground? But if you are sitting in a strategy room and devising a dashboard, nobody would have thought of it.
Yeah,
so this is another example of metrics that you need to have common sense. You need to look at it end to end. So you can't replace judgment. Metrics inform judgment. They don't replace judgment.
Correct. Absolutely. I mean, like they say, you can have all the metrics, but finally people win on gut, especially in sales. So, I think we overshot on time. Srividya, over to you. I think we overshot on time with you.
Yeah. So thank you very much, Molly and Arun, for a very interesting discourse on the metrics and highlighting how best to use metrics and how not to ensure gamification of the metrics by having too many of them. It was a very interesting topic, and any of you do or want to ask questions later, please reach out to us. And thanks for your time. Thanks, Arun, for the fabulous presentation on the book.
Thank you all for the opportunity. Really
Thank
good
you
session.
so much. Thanks, Arun. Thanks, Arun, for coming in
Thank you
and
for having me.
talking to us today.